I will now rewind back to the phase of trauma. If you grew up in a house that had trauma, it's definitely not your fault, because everybody grew up in a house that had trauma. No matter how healthy your family is, there is a form of trauma that is there. Hi guys, welcome to another episode of Not Fine podcast. Today we are going to be talking about one of the most hidden secrets in the world. Guess what it is? It is how to navigate adulthood. Adulthood is the most not talked about phenomenon of life. I mean, when you are young and you have adult uncles and aunties, everything looks good for them. So good that you can't wait to be like them, yeah? But when you become like them, you now start to wonder, are these the things that these people were facing and never spoke about? They never looked like it. And we cannot even understand how we ourselves are going through it. Then we pass down that same thing to the next generation. They don't know how to go through these things. So today I've come to let the cat out of the basket and raise this conversation of how to navigate adulthood. So my first disclaimer will be that there's actually no how. Maybe that's why we don't have this conversation. There's actually no how to navigate adulthood. What we can do is have conversations, learn from each other, and optimize to be able to live effectively. So what's adulthood? Adulthood is that phase of life where we're transitioning from adolescence, which is the point of change, into where you are now becoming a parent of yourself, where you now are able to make decisions for yourself and be responsible for your life. And guess what? The problem is that we are never prepared for this phase of our lives. Nothing prepares you. But is that how it's supposed to be? Of course not. That's not how it's supposed to be. How do we even know what we use to mark the phase of adulthood? There are general things that we use to mark the phase of adulthood. One of them is age. I mean, when you are 18 upwards, you are now considered as an adult, whether you are psychologically ready for it or not. Another thing is the culture. When you have grown to a certain level in your life, there are certain responsibilities that your culture begins to place upon you. There are certain demands that are now expected of you. But there are certain things that we cannot control in the phase of adulthood. Things like heartbreak, things like loss of parents, things like divorce. There are just a lot of things that life throws at you that you cannot tell when they are coming, just like you can tell your next birthday. So when we're talking about adulthood, we should know that there are things we can control and there are things we cannot control. And earlier this year, Not Fine hosted an online event where we spoke about adulthood, and we delved into a lot of things. But I realized that the high point for that conversation was trauma. That was where a lot of adults were really interested. And we realized that most of these traumas come from the family unit. So I went back and studied and realized that as an individual, you are formed in your family before you now transition into the phase of adulthood, which leads you to form another family, and the legacy goes on. But we're not able to merge these phases together and pass on the generative influences to the next generation. So I'm here so that we can have this conversation. Now, like I said earlier, adulthood is the phase where you begin to, parent yourself. And what does parenting mean? To me, I see parenting as culturing or reculturing. And when you begin to do this, the first thing you should know is yourself. Know thyself. And in the phase of knowing yourself, what do you need? You need to know what has gone properly in your life, and you need to know what has gone wrong in your life. If you know what has gone properly in your life, then you amplify it. And if you know what has gone wrong, then you heal. Now, we are not confident enough to face the things that have gone wrong in our lives. These are the things I'll categorize under trauma. Trauma are psychological or emotional wounds that have happened to us in the past that has caused us to now try to protect ourselves. So every time those things are triggered, we respond with coping mechanisms. And when we pass through those situations, we now leave those things unattended to. But if we really want to sort those matters, we need to pay attention to them and learn to heal through them. I always say that healing is the default of every adult that is self-conscious. If you are self-conscious of the things that have gone wrong in your life, then you understand that you need to heal. Healing is not a taboo word. Healing is not a bad word. Healing is something that you always need to constantly do. Healing is like growing. So, when we are under our parents, we make the mistake of thinking they were perfect people. We make the mistake of thinking that they knew everything that they were doing. We do not realize that even they were experimenting as they were raising us. So, for example, if you are the first child, you should know from this point on that you were the first child your parents ever raised by themselves. If you were the second child, you were the optimization of their experience of the first child. That's why you see that by the time parents are having their last children, they become more lenient and wise. So if you are the first child, you must have taken all the baggages. And if you are the last child, then you may have gotten a softer kind of raising. Now, when you become an adult, realize that that's the first time you are becoming an adult. And that's the widest range of your life. So you have a lot of mistakes to make, you have a lot of failure to make, but you need to be conscious to be able to optimize those things as you move. So your first level of adulthood, for example, when you turn 18 to 20, is you trying to build an identity for yourself. And as you're trying to build an identity for yourself, you must recognize that you are also trying to understand the things that you don't want for yourself. So there is an identity crisis at that part of your life. By the time you're entering your 20s, you are now at a point where you are supposed to begin to experiment a lot. Most times, we are not conscious of process in adulthood. We just want to jump to becoming rich people. That's the pressure in Nigeria now. All of us want to be rich. And when you are rich, it looks like you are successful because that's the metrics that the culture is now using to measure. But that's not supposed to be. Because if you go through the shortcut, it's going to catch up with you at the later phase of your adult life, because you won't have anything to pass on to the next generation. So I'm here to say today that there's a process that you're supposed to go through. And if you go through that process properly, you'll be able to have experiences that you'll be able to pass on to the next generation. So if you are at the point of experimenting, then you should understand that you must not be rich at that point. Anybody that is rich at that point is probably an outlier or a Yahoo boy. And trust me, you don't want to be a Yahoo boy. But if you are not an outlier, then that's not a problem. You can just keep living, keep experimenting, keep understanding yourself. Then at your late 20s, you're now beginning to solidify the identity that you are creating. Maybe at that point, you're now beginning to know who you are, know what you want to do, understand how you operate personally and individually. Then by the time you are getting into your 30s, you are now becoming a businessman, learning business, getting the cool cash and all that. So this is me telling all my 27, 28, 29-year-old peers, come on, let's get off that pressure of thinking that you're supposed to have like 7 cars, a house and all that. That's unreal. That's just social media life. If you understand that life is process and you are ready to go through this process, I tell you, you have hacked the process of adulthood. Then I will now rewind back to the phase of trauma. If you grew up in a house that had trauma, it's definitely not your fault, because everybody grew up in a house that had trauma. No matter how healthy your family is, there is a form of trauma that is there. And our job as adults is to be able to reduce the trauma in our nervous system so that we can pass a better nervous system to the next generation. Your job is not to give your children generational wealth as in money. Your job is to give your children generational wealth as in reduced trauma. So the amount of trauma that was passed on to you, you are responsible to reduce that trauma before you create an offspring. That's why you should be able to figure out your own life before you think about reprocreating. So I'm saying that we should learn to understand that we need to know ourselves, heal from our trauma before we begin to procreate. Now, if you know your traumas and you are now beginning to heal from it, you understand that you are making the world better, you are making the country better, you are making your environment better, you are being responsible for the healing of the nation. Trauma is not something that you can see. Trauma is something that, like I've said in a lot of my videos, trauma is something that can travel. So you can get trauma by just living with somebody, and you can also heal by living with somebody. That's why I'm having these conversations. That's why these conversations need to be had. If we are responsible enough as a generation, then trust me, the next generation are already secured. But if we cannot begin to have this conversation, if we cannot begin to face the things that we can control, the things that are quite messy, then we are not going to move anywhere. Adulthood is a point where you are responsible for looking for love for yourself. It's a place where you're supposed to have identity, and it's a place where you're also building legacy. These three things are quite cumbersome. Imagine juggling those three things at a time. It can be quite stressful. But if you understand how to place them, the hierarchy of them, and how to move through them, then you are going to optimize your adult life. If you understand that failure is a part of the journey, you are going to be a better person. If you understand that you'll be heartbroken at certain times, and all you have to do is to wake up the next day, get up and keep living. If you understand that you are not alone, this is another thing, community. We need to understand the importance of community. You know how they say, show me your friend and I'll tell you who you are. We've heard that thing so much, it has become a cliche. But it's not, trust me. If you can keep good friends around you that help remind you, help pick you up when you are falling, help ginger you towards the goal, and you can see that you guys are moving together, you will not be pressured. But imagine you are trying to live the right way and you put yourself around people that are taking the shortcuts. You will automatically feel like you are behind, which is wrong. I feel like at some point, the world is going to overturn, and that's when we will actually find out the results of our processes. But the thing is that when you find out the results, if you never took the right path, there's no way for you to go back and correct your mistakes. You'll be having to correct these mistakes at the phase of your late adulthood, which means that you will not be there with the impact of the legacy you have to pass to the next generation. And you know one thing with the next generation, if you are talking without results, they are not going to listen to you. If you're trying to bring to them your story of past glory and all that, they're not going to listen to you. But if you can build gradually, if you can keep the scars, have the failures, have the stories, and they can be backed by results, then you have earned the right to be able to speak to the next generation. That's called generativity. So if we can actually adopt this method, and, optimize, fail, learn, fail, optimize, learn, then we can become better adults. If you listen to this, there's actually no method that I just give other than being aware of the phase of adulthood. That's just basically it, guys. And I'm just coming here to initiate the conversation so that we can, communicate. So I'd like to hear your comment about what you think about adulthood, what you agree with me about, and what you disagree with me about. Let's push this conversation and take care of your mind, guys. See you on the next episode of Not Fine Podcast. Peace.